A proposal for legal precision in a changing society. The current legal and social impasse regarding gender identity and sex-based rights is not a failure of public civility, it is a failure of legal precision. Our existing frameworks, designed for a different era, struggle to accommodate new social realities without compromising the foundational protections necessary for a functioning society. To resolve this, we must move away from vague, performative policymaking and toward a mature, precise legal structure that balances material reality, individual autonomy, and human dignity. Core principles. 1. The necessity of biological reality. Biological sex is a material reality, not merely a social construct, and it forms the basis for the infrastructure of sex-based rights. Progress over the last century was built on the clear, evidence-based recognition of sex-specific needs, especially in reproductive health, specialized medical care, and fair participation in sex-segregated environments. Preserving these categories is not an act of exclusion, it is essential to maintaining the functional integrity of laws designed to address immutable biological facts. 2. The distinction between autonomy and protected fairness. Law must clearly separate voluntary choice from collective fairness. Where individuals act with personal autonomy, such as in private associations or activities where participants accept risks, the law should uphold liberty. However, in public institutions or protected spaces where people cannot opt out, the law must prioritize material fairness and safety over identity-based outcomes, ensuring that inherent biological advantages do not undermine the purpose of those spaces. 3. A surgical approach to human dignity and legal categories. Respect and dignity are universal rights, independent of biological classification. Every person deserves to live free from discrimination, and this can be achieved without eroding established protections. We propose robust, distinct legal safeguards for transgender people, separate from the definitions of man and woman. Further, to fully reflect human diversity, the law should formally recognize a third sex gender category. This category serves two key purposes. It acknowledges the biological variation of intersex people and the identities of those who do not fit binary definitions, and it provides a clear legal framework that avoids forcing changes to existing sex-based categories. This is not an erasure of existing definitions, but a precise expansion that ensures dignity and recognition for all, while keeping the core functions of the law intact. 4. The third category as a foundational pillar. Crucially, this third category must not be viewed as a secondary compromise or a residual other for those who do not fit the primary binary. Instead, it is a co-equal, independent, and foundational pillar of the legal structure, with the same inherent integrity and unique purpose as the established man and woman categories. It is not a solution to a problem, but the formal recognition of a pre-existing reality. Legal parity, a three-column structure. The current two-column framework is inherently unstable, forcing complex reality into a simplistic model. A robust system requires three distinct foundations: the male category, defined by specific biological realities, social roles, and legal needs; the female category, defined by distinct biological realities, social roles, and legal needs; the third category, defined by its own inherent biological and identity-based realities, serving as the legal home for intersex individuals and those whose identity exists outside the gender binary. This is not a hierarchy, but a tripartite system of recognition. Each category is defined by what it is, not by what it is not. The third category is its own distinct legal entity, deserving of unique considerations and protections. Uniqueness of purpose, beyond accommodation. The purpose of the third category is to formalize diversity, not merely accommodate it. Binary category exists to manage the realities of sexual dimorphism. The third category exists to manage the realities of biological and identity diversity outside that dimorphism. For intersex people, it provides a framework that acknowledges specific medical and social needs without forcing a biological misfit. For non-binary people, it offers full legal recognition, affirming identity as valid and complete, rather than a deviation from a norm. Its function is to provide clarity and dignity where the binary offers only ambiguity and erasure. Individuality as a core tenet. A common criticism, that this category risks oversimplifying a diverse group, misunderstands its function. The third category is the legal recognition of individuality. It is explicitly defined by its refusal to be monolithic. While binary categories are often treated as homogeneous groups, the third category is structured around inherent diversity, where context and individual need are paramount. For example, medical protocols here would be tailored to specific biology, not one-size-fits-all assumptions. This is not a weakness, but its greatest strength, the legal embodiment of the principle that one size does not fit all. Redefining the default, ending the other. The fear that a third category creates an other class stems from a binary mindset. In a true tripartite system, there is no other, only three recognized norms. The default ceases to be male or female unless proven otherwise, and becomes one of three from the outset. This eliminates the burden of opting out of the binary and replaces it with the equal status of opting in to a category that fits. The third category is not a departure from the norm, but an expansion of what is considered normative. Society must adapt to reality. Crucially, formal recognition creates a corresponding legal obligation. This framework requires that society adapts its infrastructure, administration, and habits to match the complexity of human reality, rather than forcing people to fit outdated, simplistic structures. If a third category is recognized, then provision for it becomes mandatory. For example, if separate sanitary facilities are provided based on sex or gender, the law must insist that a third option is also provided. It is no longer acceptable to offer only two choices and force people to compromise. Clarity means complete provision. Inclusivity means building the systems required to serve everyone. 5. Acknowledging men's specific needs and rights. A precise legal approach must also move beyond treating men as a single, undifferentiated group. Historically, broad catch-all frameworks have obscured the specific challenges men face in areas such as mental health, family law, and workplace safety. By replacing generic policies with targeted, evidence-based provisions, the law can ensure equality is a functional outcome, recognizing the realities of men's lives as clearly as it does women's. Conclusion. Generalized definitions no longer serve the complexity of modern society. For the law to remain effective, it must become more precise, not more ambiguous. We advocate for a system that is honest about biological reality, creates clear parallel protections for different identities and needs, and formally recognizes a third category as a foundational, co-equal pillar of legal order. This framework is not a radical break from tradition, but an evolution toward greater accuracy. The law's function is to reflect society, and our society has never been strictly binary. By completing the legal structure, we ensure progress for one group never requires the dismantling of rights for another, and build a system as diverse and multifaceted as the people it serves. The roadblocks we face. While this framework offers a constructive way forward, significant challenges must be addressed. The incompatibility challenge. Critics may argue that creating distinct categories, including a foundational third category, risks establishing a hierarchy of rights or separate but equal status. The solution lies in designing a legal doctrine where sex-based rights, identity protections, and third category recognition operate as parallel, equal, and complementary frameworks, rather than conflicting ones. The subjectivity gap. Much current debate assumes that either biological reality is irrelevant, or that any expansion beyond the binary is a threat. Implementing this model requires affirming that institutional clarity is a requirement for fairness, not prejudice, and that recognizing diversity does not mean abandoning factual distinctions. Implementation and enforcement burden. Opponents may claim that precise definitions and new categories will increase bureaucracy, cost, or require physical changes to infrastructure. It is true, this model demands that society adapts to the complexity of the topic. If a third category exists, then a third bathroom, a third medical protocol, or a third category on a form must be provided. However, this is not a flaw, it is the definition of fairness. In reality, we already face the bureaucracy of uncertainty caused by vague rules, arguments over access, and inconsistent decisions. A clear, consistent standard replaces case-by-case chaos with predictable legal obligations. Just as society adapted to requirements for accessibility or safety, it must adapt here. Providing for all categories is simply the cost of a complete and equitable system. Resistance to essentialism. There will be pushback against distinguishing between protecting biological categories and limiting autonomy. The goal is not to return to outdated constraints, but to preserve the hard-won infrastructure of rights while making dignified legal space for human variation. Review and analysis. This proposal presents a structured approach to resolving tensions between gender identity and sex-based rights, rooted in the belief that legal ambiguity is the primary source of conflict. By combining clear biological categories, separate dignity protections, and a formal third category established as a foundational pillar, it seeks to deliver inclusion without eroding existing safeguards. The framework rests on the idea that law works best when it reflects both material realities and human diversity, rather than forcing everyone into rigid binaries or vague definitions. Supporting perspectives. Proponents argue this is a both-and solution. It protects the sex-based rights and spaces that women and girls rely on, while offering full legal recognition to transgender, non-binary, and intersex people. Legal scholars often note that greater precision strengthens the rule of law by making rights and obligations clearer and more consistent. Advocates for men's issues also support this approach, as it allows for targeted policies that address specific needs previously overlooked in generic frameworks. Supporters further contend that perceived conflicts between rights are artificial, created only when incompatible definitions are forced into the same legal categories. Framing the third category as a co-equal pillar, rather than an afterthought, is seen as a critical strength, one that normalizes diversity and removes the stigma of being classified as other. Furthermore, the principle that recognition requires provision is viewed as the key to ending the current conflict. Instead of debating who enters which door, the law simply requires that the correct number of doors be built. Critical perspectives. Critics raise significant concerns. Some argue that defining and administering a third category risks creating a permanent other class, leading to segregation or unequal treatment, even if framed as equal. Many transgender advocates maintain that equality requires full inclusion within existing categories, not separate status, and that the proposal's framing of biological sex oversimplifies human bodies and identities. Legal experts also caution that parallel systems can create new conflicts, administrative complexity, and unintended consequences, especially in areas like healthcare, education, or housing, where separate categories may be impractical or costly to implement. Others note that what the proposal calls precision could become rigid rules that exclude or marginalize people whose experiences do not fit neatly into any defined group, or that the third category's emphasis on diversity may make it too broad to apply consistently. Core unresolved questions. The success of this model depends on answering questions that remain widely debated. How can legal categories, including a third category, be defined fairly and consistently, given the diversity of human bodies and identities? Can separate protections truly deliver equal dignity, or does equality require access to the same spaces and rights as others? How do we balance competing claims of harm, such as safety and privacy on one hand, and inclusion and dignity on the other? What level of legal complexity is acceptable, and how do we balance clarity with the flexibility needed to serve diverse lives? There is no universal answer to these questions, and different societies have adopted very different approaches. This proposal represents one coherent attempt to resolve the impasse through precision, categorization, and the formal recognition of diversity, but it remains part of an ongoing global conversation about how to build laws that are fair, inclusive, and functional for everyone.